Hi, I'm Carl Franklin. In this episode of Blazor Train, we're going to dive into binding, the secret sauce that associates parts of your user interface to variables in your application. And for this episode, I've invited my friend Joel Hewlin to the party. Joel has lots of experience with JavaScript frameworks, but is at heart a C# developer. And you'll see his reaction to the wonderfully webby world of Blazor binding. And that's coming up right now, right here on Blazor Train. Blazor Train! Blazor is a single-page application user interface framework for the web. Just like Vue, React, Angular, and of course Knockout, one of the very first popular UI frameworks, which was written by Steve Sanderson, the man responsible for Blazor. The main function of a UI framework is to bridge the gap between what the app does and how the user interacts with the app, the user interface. Before these UI frameworks came on the scene, web developers did everything manually, making AJAX calls to servers to get bits of data and then updating the UI elements one by one as they needed to change. And that strategy works well until your app grows in size and more DOM elements become dependent on each other. The key to reducing the manual work you do as a developer is, you guessed it, binding. Binding is how you can associate variables with DOM elements. You can bind any variable to any property or attribute of any DOM element. Once bound, you only have to change the variables to update the UI. Now, I know this idea is rudimentary for most of my viewers. However, I feel it's important to explain the big picture for those who may be new to web programming and UI frameworks. As I said earlier, I've invited a super smart friend of mine, Joel Hewlin, to get his reaction as he sees how binding is done in Blazor for the first time. Let's watch. Okay, this is going to be so awesome because I'm here with my friend and fellow AppVNext engineer, Joel Hewlin. Hey, Joel.
Hey, Carl.
Now, I asked you to be here because I wanted somebody to see Blazor binding who's never seen it before. And you haven't, right?
I have not, no.
Do you know anything about Blazor, actually?
Yeah, I mean, I know the basics, basically the bits that you hear in the news and little snippets that you get from newsletters, but that's basically it, you know. I know that it's basically C# in the browser.
Yeah.
Which sounds awesome, but also a little bit weird.
Right. And so let's set the tone for our viewers in terms of your experience as a developer. From what I know of you, you are a full stack developer. You've done UI stuff in CSS, in JavaScript, lots of JavaScript. Yep. You've done backend stuff. In fact, you've done work for Microsoft, right? On their documentation for Azure Labs and things like that, right? And you've worked with other companies as well. So what UI frameworks in JavaScript have you actually worked with?
I mean, I've worked with vanilla JavaScript ever since the late 90s, early 2000s. I remember the days of trying to get dynamic stuff to work back then. Right. You know, moved into jQuery just like everybody else when it was cool, and then Knockout when that seemed cool for a while. And then, you know, the more modern frameworks, I did use Angular for a little bit and played around with React, but really, I mean, lately my last several projects has been with Vue, Vue.js.
All right.
And I like the simplicity of it.
Cool. And I know you're working a lot with Alliance, with Michelle and Brian and those guys there, and working through them for Microsoft. So I think you're really qualified to have an opinion as someone who's done, as you said, Knockout, Angular, React, Vue. You've done all these JavaScript UI frameworks, and you don't necessarily have to be an expert to know how to compare this new component model for binding to what you have already seen, right?
Yeah, that sounds fair.
All right, cool. Well, just because you may have not seen the demo of Blazor, you know, when you create a Blazor application, there can be two. You have a choice of a server-side Blazor app or a WebAssembly Blazor app. The server-side runs in the server. WebAssembly runs in the browser. This is a server-side Blazor app. I'm trying to keep it simple.
Okay.
All right. So essentially, the canonical demo is the counter, right? You've got this click me button.
Very impressive.
Oh, yeah. It's so impressive. And all of my viewers and people who know me are totally sick of the counter by this point.
Yeah.
All right. So what we're going to do is show some binding. So I'm going to just get rid of all the stuff in the default page, the index page. I'm going to replace it with this. So, yeah. So here we have this message, which is a private string. It's a string property, and it's just set to two-way bound message. And all I'm doing for a one-way binding is just using the @razor syntax to just put that wherever I want in the HTML.
Okay.
Okay.
So basically, if I can interrupt you here, this is not a typical kind of template like you would see in the JavaScript framework. For instance, Vue would be a .vue page where you've got, it's an HTML-based DOM template, which this seems more like. It's definitely not like a React JSX page, which is basically XML. Right. So you're just using Razor syntax here for your one-way.
Razor syntax, yeah.
Okay.
It's all Razor syntax, and you know this same code is going to work equally well on the server and in the client. There isn't any difference in the code block that you need to do. There isn't any plumbing code that you need to do if it's on the client or if it's on the server. It just works. They've got magic in there that with SignalR that makes it all work, and I've gone through all that stuff. But
it uses SignalR.
Yeah, the server-side version uses SignalR to automatically hook the DOM elements and communicate with the server. The server then looks at the DOM graph that it has of the client DOM in memory, and it runs the code and applies it. And then any differences it sends back in these tight binary messages through SignalR that gets hooked in their JavaScript and then updates the DOM. So
interesting.
Yeah, so it's basically doing AJAX for you automatically.
Right. Over WebSockets.
Over WebSockets, over SignalR, yeah. So this message could be a property of an object that you create. Right? It doesn't, it could be, you could use the view model idea if you want to, and access the properties of those objects. This is just for simplification. That is the simplest way to do one-way binding in Blazor.
All right.
So your reaction so far relative to, let's say, Angular?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, Angular, there's so much ceremony involved, right? Like, you could not do this with this few lines of code in one page in Angular. And I guess the question is, the thing that you kind of fall into with these JavaScript frameworks is sort of your dependency hell, for lack of a better term. You know, you've got all these NPM packages and things that all need to load up in order to even begin. And so what does that look like here?
Yeah, that's a good point. So all that we've done, Joel, is we've taken the default template, right? And we've just changed the index page to this code right here. That's it.
Nice.
So there's no other dependencies other than what's in the template.
It's very clean. And I mean, that's why I've switched to Vue, because I like the cleanliness of it, for lack of a better term. It's less ceremony involved. So this is very much down that path.
Okay.
All right.
So now let's get to two-way binding. So we've got an input tag here. and we're using the @bind syntax to bind, and we haven't specified a property to bind to, and so therefore it's going to bind this message to the default property of input, which is value.
Okay.
All right, so I could specify, if I want to, the property that I want to bind to just with a dash.
Okay, so you always prefix with @bind.
Yep.
Then you could do that. So you could maybe do like bind style or CSS or something like that too.
Well, I think that would be a different thing, but any property of that element you can bind to.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so let's run this again and see what happens when we change. Well, we haven't actually run it, have we? Let's run it for the first time and see what happens when we change the message. So I have a two-way bound message, and I'm going to type changed, and I have to trigger the change. And to do that, the default event, DOM event, that triggers that change and forces the update of that message is onChanged.
On blur or on change?
Yeah, unblur, sort of same thing. OnChange, which is when it loses focus.
Okay.
So I'm going to hit the tab key. Ready? Boom.
Changed. Nice.
Okay. So far, so good. So what if I want to change the event to like a keystroke that forces the update? I can do that with @bind::event and set that to, say, on input. Okay.
Okay.
And so now every time I press a key, this, with the contents of the value, are going to update the message, which updates this label right here.
Interesting. Now, can you bind multiple events?
Let's just run this first, and then
I
will take your questions. All right, so change on every key press.
Right.
All right, so
it really highlights your inability to spell. I like that.
You like that? Did I mess up?
No, you just you fixed it while you're typing.
Yeah, that's why I love editing. Yeah. All right, so there's one-way binding and two-way binding. Now, you were asking me a question.
Yes. Can you have multiple events in your bindings? So you have your on input. By default, it's on blur or on change.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't.
In other words, you want this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Right? You want to specify multiple events.
Right.
I do not think so.
Okay.
But I don't know. But I guarantee you, after we do this, I will research that and tell the police whether we can do it or not.
See, I was wondering how long it would take to come up with a question you don't know.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yeah.
Pretty good.
So what I would do is, if I wanted to, I could hook another event, right? I could hook an event like on key press or on key up, right? And then I could say key up handler, and I could create a key up handler.
All right.
Like this. All right, now this is going to get, even though we still have this binding going on, this is going to get access on every key press. So let's do this. All right, so now we can look and see that args passed, the key is C. I don't know if you can see that, but the key that I pressed is C, and message is also C. So,
it's also C.
Yeah, so this is how you can hook events like you would in JavaScript. The difference is that you're using the @ syntax instead of just on key up.
Right. Which is similar to Vue also, when you're when you're binding events, you can do that same kind of shortcut
Right.
with the at. So I like that.
Yeah, it's good. And, here's what, now you've done Knockout, right?
Yeah.
I did Knockout, when it came out and, had a brief stint with it after that. And I kind of like it, but you can definitely see that Steve Sanderson, who sort of, Blazor is his brainchild, how he took all the things that he learned from building Knockout, and then he went to use Knockout to build out the Azure portal.
Yeah.
Right. So the Azure portal is built in Knockout with, under Steve Sanderson, he did it. So he used all of that knowledge and experience and put it into this Blazor component model. And you can really see how he's trying to just make it as simple as possible. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And the nice thing that I did like about Knockout is the fact that if you just want the binding, you don't have all the other framework stuff around it like you do with Angular.
Right.
So I'm wondering if there's some similarities to this. I guess that leads me to a question as to if you have an existing MVC application or Razor application,
yeah,
what does it take to Blazorify it?
All you really have to do is, and I'm going to do this in a upcoming episode of Blazor Train. All you really have to do is add the services, add the middleware, and then you can start adding Razor pages that have the Blazor component model that use it. So yeah, you just have to add a couple of files, and then you can add Blazor pages and components to existing MVC Razor applications.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I love that kind of approach. That's another, I keep coming back to Vue because, like I said, it's my current favorite of the week. But it's that same sort of thing. It allows you to do that sort of incremental adding of it into your existing project. So
yeah,
I love that.
Take over everything.
Okay, now we have to replumb everything.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So now I've also added a component, and I've done that just by right-clicking on the shared folder and saying add Razor component, and I've called it child component. So rather than just doing that for you, I'm going to show you what that looks like. So the people who have already gotten to this point in Blazor Train already know this, but every page is a component, but every component isn't necessarily a page. So a page is essentially a routable component. It's a component that you can get to with a URL route. Okay, but in essence, everything Blazor is a component. So here's a component called child component, and I've got a div with some inline styling, which you should never do, right?
Right.
Right. And I've got a parent message parameter here, and the parameter basically tells Blazor that this is a public bindable field, right?
Okay.
That we can set in the parent, and we can also get updates to in the parent.
It kind of reminds me of the old school user controls web form.
Yeah.
Remember those?
That's no accident. Yep.
Yep.
So there's a lot of goodness for ASP.NET Web Forms developers, and again, that's an upcoming episode of Blazor Train where I'm going to talk about that. But I want to show you what events look like. So I've defined an event. Now you've done a lot of events in C#. You've got custom things that inherit from event args, and now you have to have an event, and you have to have delegates, and you have to do all this yada yada, right?
Yep.
So look at this. Public event callback of string. In other words, that's what I'm passing back. Right? Message changed is the name of it. When I click this button, I'm calling update message. Update message sets our parent message to Blazon, and then we invoke message changed, which is our event, passing in parent message.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Follow me so far?
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
All right. So now we need to handle this event somehow. Now in your classic C# stuff, we would have, we would add a listener and have an event handler. Even in JavaScript, you'd add a listener, right? And then you'd have to remove the listener afterwards. All right, so let's do this. Let me change this code. Here's how we instantiate the child component, and we set the parameters. We're binding the parent message property of the child component to our message property. And look at this. We're doing the event handling without an event handler. We're binding the parent message event that changes the parent message to message changed.
That's cool. Yeah, so it follows that exact same pattern of binding events, but now it has that special name there of that event.
Yeah.
I like that.
Doesn't that? Okay. And now what's going to happen is we still have our bind event on input for message. Mm-hmm. So I can still change it, here.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Now, because it's bound in the component I've got gray. Mm-hmm. And because it's bound in the component, it changes in the component. But if I want to change it from the component, boom.
Blazor.
Now it changes in the component, and because we're bound here through the event, we didn't even have to have an event handler. We just bound it and bound it by event. All right. So your reaction, sir?
Yeah. Again, the small amount of code and ceremony that's required is pretty amazing. I mean,
yeah. And it's C#.
Yeah, and it's C#, and it is very reactive, as I could see here. And so in this case, and I'm jumping ahead because I do that.
No, that's fine.
This is Blazor on the server, and then there's Blazor with WebAssembly.
Yep.
This is Blazor on the server still, right?
Yeah, but the code would be exactly the same.
The code is the same. But in Blazor on the server, it is using SignalR to basically pass packets back and forth, basically chunks. Yeah, little chunks, basically, to update the DOM. To basically do the rendering and any interactivity on the server side, and it passes it back. You're not having to do any API calls or anything.
Yep, that's right.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I'd love to see what this looks like fully integrated, where you do have API endpoints and things like that within the application.
Sure.
Just because then you can really see all the extra stuff that you can cut out.
Yes, that's right.
Oh man.
So think about this. Bind :event on input. Every time I enter a keystroke, we are sending a message via SignalR to the server on every keystroke. Now, do you care? Do you want to see what that looks like?
I do.
All right.
I was hoping you'd open up F12. Yeah.
There you go. I'm going to do a Control F5.
All right.
And not a whole lot of data was transferred, about 433K uncompressed, 164K compressed, so not a whole lot. And this _Blazor right there is the WebSocket. And if I click on that, now you can see the messages. And I'm just going to clear them. And I'll go blah, like that. Okay? So take a look. Right. 179 bytes up. 323 bytes back, 27 bytes to confirm.
And can you click on one of those? Let's click on that. Yep. Yeah. Okay, so that's what it goes on render co. Oh yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
It's like looking at a real application.
Yeah. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah.
So not a lot of it, I guess it could be chatty if you're doing, every keystroke, but what the heck? That's what the internet's for. It's to get my data to you so you can bring it back to me. Okay, last minute thoughts before we wrap up this conversation.
Where do I sign up?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know you want this.
This is really cool. Okay, in your honest opinion,
yeah,
do you think this is ready for prime time? Is this?
It is prime time.
It is prime time.
It's not only ready for prime time. It is being used in real scenarios. One scenario I can tell you it's being used right now is DevExpress, the sponsor of Blazor Train. If you go to their Blazor demos, that page is a Blazor application in production.
Okay, I'll have to check that out.
Yep. That's just one. Right. But WebAssembly has been around since 2015 or so, and continues to progress. And Blazor WebAssembly has recently just been released, and there's a couple of things that you still can't do debug-wise in Blazor WebAssembly, like, in the initialization code and stuff. You can't set breakpoints and look at variables. I mean, you can set breakpoints, but you can't really inspect variables. But by the time .NET 5 ships, rocking and rolling.
Then it'll be in there. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And if you watch Blazor Train, there are some workarounds for the debugging stuff in the meantime.
Console.output?
No, you can actually create a Blazor server application, reference a Blazor client application for all the components and the pages, and then you can actually set breakpoints when you run it from the server side.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's actually pretty clever.
Steve Sanderson, again, the epitome of clever.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, this is very cool. I mean, I have been number one, I've been really busy, so I don't really get a chance to play around with new stuff all the time. But I do want to start diving into this, and I'm just waiting for the right opportunity.
And I think you're not alone, that there's a lot of people out there who, especially those who have invested money and time in their teams in JavaScript technologies that, are all of a sudden like, what? CSharp Browser? What? Oh yeah, we might want to check that out when we get a free, minute, because it's time consuming developing. I mean, it doesn't matter what you're developing in, but if you've invested all that time and money in Angular, let's say, or even React or Vue or anything, then nobody's saying you should jump ship, but check it out. Maybe there's ways that you can chisel pieces off and get them over to C# if that's what you want.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm really interested in your follow-up one about how do you start integrating this into an existing application? Because that's where I see an opportunity to do that with the project I'm working on. Great. And so that's where I would probably start, and then do a side-by-side comparison.
Now, the project you're working on, does it use Vue?
Yes. Okay. So, but what I would do is have basically a new Blazor project. Yeah, now that I think about it, because it is a SPA, I wouldn't really be able to take full advantage of Blazor, right? Because I don't have any back-end code in this particular project. All that is basically microservices that are running. And so this is more of a project. If I had a project that was more like an MVC type of web application.
Yeah. I mean,
actually, I do have another. Yeah, I have another project in mind I could actually experiment with that I'm working on right now. That is an MVC application.
So what I'd like to see, and I think the viewers would like to see too, is like an existing Angular, ASP.NET app that we could utilize, that we could build, we could add Blazor to, and sort of do what the Angular page does in Blazor, side by side, different route, different URL. And that would be a fun episode.
That would be. Yeah, I don't have any. Actually, I do. I have an old one that would fit the bill. Okay, I'll have to dig that up because that's the ideal kind of side by side comparison because you
Right.
have that mix within the same project
Yeah.
of the Angular front end, and then you've got all the .NET backend stuff because that's
All right.
really where you'll see the value.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I could see a lot of code being cut out, which is good. Like,
yeah,
let's
keep in touch, and
definitely.
we'll sign off for now, but we'll talk about that offline.
Right.
And Joel, thanks for letting me show you this.
Yeah, this is exciting. I had no idea.
Cool.
So I appreciate it.
I'll see you around.
All right. Thanks, Carl.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Well, before we wrap up, I want to address Joel's question, and then I have something else for you. So his question was, can you have multiple events that trigger an update to a bound field? Well, let's try it. I'm going to run this with onChange as our primary event. In other words, that's the default event. And so when I tab off this, everything works just as it normally would. But now what he wants to do is something like this, where you have two events that can trigger an update to message. Let's see if it works. So onInput certainly doesn't work, and if I tab off, onChange doesn't work either. So I'm going to say that's a big fat no, at least with a comma syntax. So the documentation and out there on the internet, I couldn't find any examples of this. So again, I'm going to say no. But if anyone has ideas to the contrary or has discovered something that I don't know, please let me know. Now there's another thing that I want to show, and that is date formatting in a bound input field. So here you can see we've got a date, sample date, a date time, and we're binding the input to that sample date with a particular format, right? Now this bind : format syntax is really only available for dates right now. That's what the documentation says. You might want it for currency and other data types, but as of now, it's only for dates. So let's actually run this and see what happens here. All right, let's change this to tomorrow, August 3rd, or did I say August? Well, let's make it August. There we go. And let's make it next year. Hey, let's find out when my birthday is this year. What day that falls on? It's going to be on a Tuesday. So no wild parties, I guess. Or maybe there will be. You know, all the days of the week run into each other now, don't they? Well, okay. That's about all I got for binding. Back to you in the studio, Carl. You know, it's really a wonderful thing when you can show something new to an experienced developer and they get it right away. You know, the long and short of it is binding in the Blazor component model is so elegant and concise. I'm looking forward to many, many years of app development using Blazor and Visual Studio, and I hope you are too. Hey, thanks for riding the rails with me today. This is where I jump off. I'll see you next time. Blaze a train!